All right, this works. That's perfect. That's a good start. Thank you so much, everyone. Hello and welcome to Platform Summit Day 2. It's fine. I can wait for the applause later on. That's all right. Not a problem. I'm glad to be back here because this is one of those conferences where you get a whole lot of insights when it comes to API platforms or platform engineering in general. Well, the name is Platform Summit after all. Throughout the course of the last couple of days, we've listened to a lot of different talks about different aspects of an API platform, whether internal or external. We've talked about some capabilities. We've talked about the different protocols associated with those API platforms. We've heard some of the case studies around it. We've heard a whole range of different areas, including things like security, for instance. So what I wanted to do today is actually bring out some of these different capabilities, bring it all together, and tie it to, ideally, business outcomes. Because ultimately, the success of an API platform will always be determined by the ROI, or the business outcome that it's trying or helping teams achieve. So with that, today's topic is going to be about unlocking the ROI of API platforms. And we'll talk about what success actually looks like, or what a good API platform looks like. I am Buddha. I'm a developer advocate at Tyke, also the board chair of the Open API Initiative. My journey towards API platform engineering actually started last year at Platform Summit 2023, where we were actually talking about sort of a toolkit for platform teams that will enable them to build better API platforms, which then evolved into sort of a creation of a course, which was the API Platform Engineering Fundamentals program, which then led to the creation of the API Platform Maturity Model, which coincidentally was also announced for the very first time at the Austin API Summit, Nordic KPIs. So what I wanted to talk again, today I'm going to be looking at specifically how we took that maturity model and actually built out workshops and practices, again, with the focus of creating those individuals and interactions and prioritizing them over specific processes, or maybe even using those processes to help in that specific area. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a journey when it comes to the evolution of API platforms, or evolution of sort of a journey of an enterprise in itself, where at the very beginning, you usually start off with something that is relatively simple. There is a business problem that the company is trying to achieve or trying to solve. It's usually starting off with a very small team, with a monolith, maybe a web application, easy deployment, single product, small user base. Life's pretty good at this point of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and measure some of the benefits, or I'm going to sort of try and put it in the context of complexity versus efficiency as we go along this particular journey. And in this case, efficiency specifically talks a little bit about your velocity of deploying new capabilities or features, or adding them to your API platform for your development teams to actually build out. Or in this case, it's going to be for the business itself. So right now, early stage, complexity is low, efficiency is pretty high. We move on to sort of our first milestone, where, okay, we want to break down the monolith because we want to make things a little bit more scalable. We want to move towards a world of microservices, which, again, it's a good idea, potentially leading to a little bit more complexity. We can start seeing that coming in a little bit more, where the complexity has increased a little bit. Efficiency has also gone up because it's a little bit more scalable now. Moving on to the next stage of a potential scenario of an organization where there might be acquisitions, there might be new products being brought in. Maybe this happens later on in the journey, maybe it happens earlier on, but that's where another new product is essentially being adopted here. Once again, complexity slightly increasing now. It's a whole new tool set, whole new product strategy that you need to take care of. Efficiency slowly going down because now you've got a little bit more of a sprawl when it comes to your overall product stack. Need to be able to manage that a little bit better. Moving on now, you want to move on to the cloud deployments. You want to be able to work across maybe a single cloud, maybe a multi-cloud. You want to be able to, again, make deployments a little bit more efficient, make it available towards your end users who are now growing in user base. They're now spread across the world. You want to be able to service them better. Going multi-channel. Now, they're no longer using just a web application. They're now using mobile applications, different interfaces for interacting with your product. You now need to be able to cater to some of those things. Maybe you were using REST APIs. Now you're moving towards GraphQL. Maybe thinking about asynchronous APIs as well. So again, a little bit of that complexity growing up, but you're trying to cater to a larger user base and their specific requirements. And then that obviously consequently leads to more requirements for security, because now your surface area of attack has grown significantly. You've got more microservices, you've got more deployment areas. You need to manage that a lot better now. So And then finally, you might be having an even more explosion of scale. There might be an uptick at some point of time, something that you might have done, a new product launch, and things go completely off the rails a little bit, both in a positive way, but potentially a negative way as well. So what started off as low complexity, high efficiency is now moved into the realm of significantly higher complexity, maybe not as much efficiency anymore. What that looks like in terms of growing pains, now it's a lot harder to actually discover the APIs that you've been building because there might be multiple teams as part of your organization who are now building their own APIs, but they're not aware of some of the APIs that might have already existed. Therefore, lesser API reuse, and therefore, more time being spent on things that they may not need to spend on. There's a higher surface area of attack from a security standpoint. Things are a lot harder to actually troubleshoot. And there is the lack of standardization, which is making life a lot harder. It's a lot more costly to actually maintain something like this. What that could look like in numbers, and this is sort of an average across some of the organizations, is that now your release cycles can span across 6 to 8 months. That means, on average, in a year, you're only being able to create one proper release, which may not be enough for you if you're trying to stay competitive in an evolving market. Your average deployment times could span from 4 to 5 hours, could be even longer in some cases. I'm taking an average here. You might have additional costs because of that lack of standardization, because people are working on things without reusing existing API artifacts. That could be in the realm of $100,000+ on an annual basis, which, again, that number could go up and down quite significantly. Which would lead to a situation like this, where your developers or your ops teams are kind of in this kind of a situation, trying to fight fires day in and day out. So what is the solution? Well, we are at Platform Summit, so the solution is API platform engineering, of course. That is the silver bullet, isn't it? To be able to solve all the problems. It's essentially you adopt an API platform, it's going to solve all of those issues, and your life is good once again. But that's not how life works, does it? Because when you're thinking about an API platform, you need to start thinking not just about what it's trying to deliver, which is obviously having a centralized governance platform to help your distributed development teams to build better products in a more efficient way. Those products then serve your end users, which then leads to business outcomes, which hopefully ultimately leads to a return on your investment. That entire life cycle, that entire journey needs to be managed efficiently to be able to get that final outcome. That is what needs to happen when it comes to API platform engineering and its success on an ongoing basis. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what good actually looks like. Some of the metrics that might matter and you might want to consider as you go into building out your API platform. And I've tried to sort of distill things down into primarily 3 categories. There might be a few more. You might be able to break these down a little bit further. But starting off with velocity and efficiency, this can take a few different forms. You could call it productivity of your platform. You could even call it sort of the realm of self-service related things in your platform. But what I'm trying to talk about here specifically is around the release of new capabilities, release of your new features, and the deployment times associated with it. That's your velocity, efficiency, to be able to also work and adopt the platform that exists and build out products in a much more efficient way. That's that one metric that I'm talking about. Then talking about cost savings, once again, comes from the point of view of cost efficiencies from standardization. This is particularly specific to internal API platforms. External API platforms could also go into the realm of revenue generation if that is one of the areas that you're thinking about. But cost savings is definitely one of the key drivers there, and that velocity and efficiency indirectly could lead to cost savings as well, because if your teams are performing at a more efficient way and able to deliver things faster, that is cost savings in itself as well. And then finally, developer happiness. And I was trying to sort of figure out the best way to put this together because, again, there could be terms around developer experience and a whole range of different things. But to be able to quantify something and tie it to a KPI, I thought developer happiness, which is then built around how many developers are actually onboarding or using your API platform to actually deliver the products that they are meant to deliver, as well as potentially even getting feedback directly to say, hey, this is actually helping us out. Your net promoter scores, if you remember, that could be one of those things for your internal developers who can help you understand whether they're actually getting value out of this API platform or not. So then, how do you build out a good API platform? We saw some of the metrics up there which were not the most desirable metrics. We'll get to a metric which we can achieve by virtue of doing this. I'm going to focus this around starting off with strategizing, defining what that good is, starting with some of those KPIs we looked at. Implementation, starting the journey towards that good API platform that you're going for. Future-proofing and composability, evaluating that platform that you have created and then repeating it over and over again. This is an agile process. You're going to keep going with it. So from a strategy standpoint, as I said, we created something called the API Platform Maturity Model, and the idea for this was to be able to assess your current platform team's maturity of the platform as well as the team overall, and then defining a roadmap for the future, as well as allocating resources effectively and efficiently to be able to deliver that specific roadmap. There was one other element there, which was to be able to unite all the teams towards a shared outcome, which is very, very important, once again, to be able to have all the different stakeholders in the room to be able to move towards a shared vision, because otherwise, you're not really going to get the correct velocity and direction of travel. So the maturity model, for those who are unfamiliar, looks something like this. It has got 2 parts to it. There are 5 pillars across 4 dimensions. I'm not going to go into the details of it. It's available online today. One is dedicated towards the platform decision makers. The other one is specific towards the implementers, goes towards some of the capabilities that your API platform might want to achieve. And then you've got your key stakeholders that you ideally need to be able to participate in this process of road mapping your API platform, which would include your internal platform teams, which is your platform owners, managers, engineers, solution architects, but equally your external stakeholders outside of your platform team, like the actual developers who are building out or using your platform, as well as the business stakeholders involved, which then leads us to the API platform maturity roadmap. And just to give you a quick sense of what that looks like, there are a couple of elements here, once again, to bring together those different components of that maturity model and actually creating something with a time horizon specifically for up to 6 to 9 months. We don't want to try and boil the ocean and try to achieve everything that you want to do within 5 years or 2 years or even 3 years. We want to be able to have something that's achievable and something that we can talk about and reference and learn from within a smaller period of time, which in this case is 6 months. So you start off with just trying to understand some of the reasons for adopting your API platform, some of the KPIs that you want to deliver by the end of it. You then look at your current level of maturity, start prioritizing across specific strategic dimensions and implementation dimensions. In this case, we only want to pick one priority across each one of those instead of trying to do everything. And then we want to see how we can get there together. And this is where maximum collaboration comes in, because we want to be able to pool in exactly what we want to achieve here. Which moves us into the implementation side of things again. With implementation, once you've got this roadmap out there, the thinking here is start with something called the thinnest viable platform. Start small. Emphasize on self-service and keep things as streamlined as possible. The more you produce, the more you implement, the more you test out, the better it's going to be as you go along. Some of the capabilities, without going to the specifics of technology, we can talk about Kubernetes, we can talk about Tyke, we can talk about Curity specifically, but the idea is you want to think about your capabilities from the standpoint of discoverability, security, governance, and observability, which form the core of most of the API platforms that exist. And then finally, that leads us into future-proofing. And that was the reason why I went into a more agnostic approach to your API platform, where you think about how your API platforms the needs will always evolve. There's never a static process, and you need to keep the level of flexibility balanced out through complexity or balanced against complexity to be able to achieve that on an ongoing basis. And that's where you don't want vendor lock-in. You want to go ideally as far ahead and all in as possible with open standards, as we will see. And once again, keep things as streamlined as possible. The open standards, sometimes I'm trying to not make it too much of a direct correlation, but you think about discoverability, maybe think about your open API specifications, think about the portals that enable you to use some of those things from a security standpoint, think about open authorization, the IDPs, in this case, it's your identity providers, observability through open telemetry, or centralized governance with something like open policy agent as well. I think we've heard a few talks around that as well. This leads us into something that's a composable API management strategy, where, once again, when we look at the spectrum of maturity across API platforms, early stage or early maturity platform teams usually tend to favor a platform that tries to achieve a few different things and has a few different capabilities all locked into a single platform. But as that maturity evolves, they usually shift towards something where they need dedicated solutions, which are then managed through a centralized platform, which is where the level of composability comes in. And this is very much achievable if you're going through that open standards world as much as possible. So with that, the final step is around evaluation and then repeating it. So how do you evaluate your API platform strategy? Think back to the KPIs that you have defined and evaluate against those KPIs. Learn and report. I think communication is a very, very important part because ultimately it's not just affecting your internal API platform team, but also the entire business as a whole. And you need to be able to communicate that in the best way possible because that, again, leads to better investment and better resources being allocated towards the longevity of your API platform. So going back to the metric that were less desirable, what you could achieve, what good could actually look like, is something like this, where your release cycles could come down to anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks, where you can actually have, I'm not talking about major releases necessarily, but to be able to have ongoing releases being delivered through these platforms. You could have average deployment times down all the way to about somewhere around the 15 minutes mark, where you could have cost savings of about $30,000 to $100,000 on an average by pure standardization. We're not looking at indirect cost savings. So final takeaways. Strategy, define what good looks like for you. Start with those KPIs and business outcomes. Think about implementation, start small and then build up from there. Think about future-proofing your platform through composability and open standards, and evaluate on an ongoing basis, communicate what you've learned and what you've achieved, and then finally repeat that process, use the maturity model, and get everyone collaborated towards a shared vision. So hopefully that gave you a good bit of an understanding of some of the KPIs that might matter and what good might actually look like, how you can achieve it. And if you do have questions, more than happy to help out. The template for the workshop is going to be available here if you want to use it and try it out for yourself. But otherwise, I'm here for a question. So thank you so much.